Though AAA horror games have made a comeback in recent years, the indie scene has been the place where the scariest games have flourished, even when major publishers thought horror was a dying genre. Indie developers have continued to push the genre in new directions and create terrifying or unsettling experiences. Well, besides those devs who threw together a bunch of assets off of Unity and made terrible versions of Slender the Eight Pages or Five Nights at Freddy's. Puppet Combo is one of those devs who is creating new, unique and stylish horror games. Each title has a similar aesthetic that defines the developer, but each title is also distinct from one another in terms of gameplay and setting. At some point, I plan on covering their work in some sort of retrospective video, I think. I don't know, but needless to say, I've been a fan of their work for a long time. So when they posted on Twitter about review copies for their latest game, Samhain, I thought to myself, I'm a YouTuber who reviews games that are all about the horror stuff, so I reached out and was supplied my first ever review code. Thanks, Puppet Combo! So this video will be, well, a spoiler-free review of Samhain, a very short horror experience. It is set during the festival of Samhain, which is basically Halloween but for the Celts. At face value, the story in Samhain is pretty simple. A boy and his two brothers live with their mother, who is just a black blob, in a small town with houses connected by long paths surrounded by tall weeds. The town, is this even a town? Anyway, it is celebrating Samhain, which is a pagan religious festival originating from an ancient Celtic spiritual tradition in Gaelic Ireland. It is usually celebrated from October 31st to November 1st to welcome in the harvest and usher in the coolest sounding thing in the world, the dark half of the year. People who celebrated Samhain believe the barriers between the physical world and the spirit world broke down during this time, and humans were able to interact with the spirits or creatures from the other world. Samhain eventually developed into a much more well-known holiday, that cheeky little holiday being Halloween. The mother tells the boys it's time for some trick-or-treating, but warns them to stay on the path and do not go into the weeds. We don't really know why the weeds are bad, but considering how they look, I'm led to believe the mum may have a point. So after that ominous warning, the player pats their cat, and they head out with their two brothers and start door knocking. And that is about it for the story and the player's motivations. There is a lot more going on, but I shall leave it at that. When I first completed the game, I was left a bit confused by what had just happened. Not because the game throws a lot of things at you to try and figure out, but because I didn't know anything about Samhain. I won't go into spoilers, but after I researched it and played the game a second time, I found so much more to appreciate and enjoy, and also how well the history and lore of Samhain was woven not only into the story and the characters, but what the player encounters during the game and the ending. There are also neat little things in Samhain that make me question who or what the player character actually is. Fortunately though, the game does enough to make the less curious of us still have a creepy time. But if you're willing to take the extra time to go on a little history excursion, your experience of Samhain will be greatly elevated. And come on, it's about the origins of Halloween. If you're not interested in that, then why are you subscribed to my channel? Honestly though, please don't unsubscribe. I am really happy to have everyone here and appreciate the support. The gameplay in Samhain is very simple, but that allows the player to really become enveloped in the world and the atmosphere. All the player does in this game is walk with their brothers from one house to the next, speaking to the neighbours and getting treats. These treats include an eyeball, a tongue, a heart, and other delicious goodies. I'm not one to judge, but I'm more of a chocolate man myself, but hey, I've never tried a heart or an eyeball, so I could be missing out. Maybe Dharma was onto something. The player character is so happy with their treats, in fact, they hold out the pieces of a human body in front of them, as if to show off to the other kids. Other kids meaning absolutely no one, besides this scarecrow and these pumpkins that won't stop looking at me. And honestly, that is the whole game. The player walks in a straight line with some slight diversions to grab the body parts until the game ends. There's no enemies to fight or puzzles to solve, it's just the player and their two brothers going trick-or-treating, which as an Australian is quite nice because the only Halloween I get is a small row of decorations crammed in with the Christmas stuff that's been put out 2 months early. That doesn't mean the player doesn't encounter things. I won't spoil everything I saw, and honestly, I don't think I saw everything, but there are some things I want to talk about that I believe are taken from the practices of Samhain. The first thing I ran into was this scarecrow who wanted to have a chat. Unlike everyone else who warns the player to stay on the path, the scarecrow tries to encourage the kids to go for a wander. He states the best goodies can be found in the weeds and all of the other kids will be jealous. Again, not much of a proposition considering there are no other kids around. This guy seems shady as shit, and when I looked into the history of Samhain, I think I found out why. There are these shape-shifting creatures known as puka in Samhain lore who would present themselves as horses, goats, cats, dogs or hares. This creature wanted to cause harm to unwary travellers, and nothing is more of an unwary traveller than kids trick-or-treating. Since this scarecrow is telling the kids to go into the weeds, I think it is actually a puka that has taken the form of the thing that scares crows. This is the most direct interaction with a creature taken from Samhain, but there are some others that if you blink, you can miss them. One creature I encountered was this white thing near the weeds, It only appears for a second and then just goes away. No fanfare, no jump scare noise, nothing, and I love it when games respect the player that way. I really wanted to know what this creature was, and with the power of the internet, I think I figured it out. This could be the Lady Gwyn. She is a headless woman dressed in white who chases people at night who are unlucky enough to run into her. She is usually accompanied by a black pig, which would have been pretty terrifying to see in the game. There are a few more I encountered and probably way more I missed, but this just shows that there is so much more going on in Samhain than I was initially led to believe. Where this simple gameplay is elevated is through the art design, the environment, the characters the player meets along the way, the awesome music, and the spooky shit that goes on during the short journey. First, I want to talk about the art design and the environment. Puppet Combo must know what type of porn I like because their choice of visuals throughout all their games really gets me off. From the first time you boot up the game, you get the feeling you are a kid watching some violent horror movie that your parents wouldn't want you to see. The choice of font to the washed out colours, the static television effect and the music. All of it feels appropriately retro. The game goes for a PlayStation 1 era 80s film inspired art design with a heavy use of neon and bright colours contrasted with thick blacks. The textures in the environment and the character models are extremely simple, but are crafted perfectly to give the player the feeling they are playing a retro game. And the fact that PlayStation is now considered retro makes me feel so fucking old. All of the houses are neon blue with very limited but distinct texture work. The colour choice makes them stick out from the rest of the environment. Speaking of, the area connecting the houses provides an ominous atmosphere. The weeds are tall, like ridiculously tall, and it feels like they are a force looming over the player. The sky is blood red and the moon watches over everything the player does. There are also these giant structures that can be seen in the background. It is hard to determine what they are supposed to be. One looks like a church while another looks like a big tower. I think the decision to make these structures difficult to make out was deliberate. There is also a point where the player crosses this large and long bridge. It comes out of nowhere and feels completely out of place. But these structures make the environment feel otherworldly or from another place or time. But these buildings and these bridges also feel as though they aren't good, which is a really not so elegant way to describe them. It's like something bad has happened in these buildings, and the fact they are separated by the weeds, which the player is told to avoid, hammers this feeling home for me. Possibly my favourite aspect of Samhain and what made me feel generally uncomfortable while playing was the music. I'm not the best at describing music, so here I go anyway. The title music sounds like it was composed by John Carpenter. There is a heavy use of high and low synth accompanied by a crackling sound that perfectly sets up the aesthetic of the game. The music that plays when the player leaves the house follows a similar tune but has a heavy emphasis on what I assume are wind instruments. I think this really complements the massive weeds surrounding the player as it gives the feeling they are outside but in a dangerous place. But my favourite piece of music is when the player stumbles across the cemetery. The soundtrack becomes all distorted and crackly. It sounds like someone surfing through different stations while tuning a radio. But there's also a haunting sound that fades in and out which underlines the track and provides some sort of melody. It is such a far cry from anything else in the game, and it unsettled me and made exploring the cemetery feel really tense. The music also knows when to take a back seat and allow the player to soak in the atmosphere. Several times in the game, the only sounds the players will hear are their footsteps. The crunching of branches and dry leaves against the player's feet provides some semblance of relatability and normalcy, so when the music does kick in, and it kicks in hard, it makes me feel like something was wrong, which is bloody brilliant. Samhain is a short and simple experience with loads of atmosphere and so much going on that hides in both the background and the foreground. Puppet Combo continues to create interesting and engaging titles that takes the horror genre in some interesting directions. If you have a spare 20 minutes, I highly recommend checking this game out. If you have a spare few hours, research the origins of Samhain. That is some damn interesting shit. Thank you for watching this here video of mine. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and let me know what you think of the game or Puppet Combo's previous work in the comments below. If you like what I do, you should click that subscribe button. And if you really like what I do, you should contribute to my Patreon for as little as $1. You will get bonus content and access to my Discord amongst a myriad of other things. Thank you to Sleight of Tongue, Walter and Devin John Malone for contributing at the highest tier. I will put you in my will so you can get all my sweet YouTube income. Fuck.